Hello everyone, I am Ding Lei from Tencent News, an automotive industry observer. I've been thinking, how can we better tell China's story and the story of automobiles, and how can we convey it to users in an appropriate way? That's why I invited my old friend, Professor Jichan from Tongji University, to co-launch this podcast dialogue series with me. Professor Zhu, it's good to see you again, Professor. Taking advantage of the timing of this auto show at this particular moment, let's take a look at the overall situation from January to April. Then in June and every quarter after that, we'll have another conversation. There's actually a lot to talk about regarding the auto show that just took place in April. It's worth mentioning that this is currently the largest auto show in the world. In terms of the exhibition area and the number of visitors, the scale of the entire auto show is unprecedented. Even the number of foreign visitors reached a record high, and at that time, I was with our team. While chatting with my colleague, he asked me what my impressions were of this auto show. At that time, I gave him my overall feedback. I said that I felt the sense of anxiety at this auto show was getting stronger and stronger, and this was mainly reflected in several aspects. The first aspect is the attitude of the company bosses, especially regarding traffic and exposure. The anxiety is evident in how they go on each other's live streams, and there are even more interesting topics within this. I even discussed this topic with the CMO of a car company. I said that when you schedule in advance to go see someone else's car together, that's just riding on their traffic and putting on a show. And then if you go secretly without scheduling, that's when you're genuinely going to learn from their experience and check out their technology. Those are two different things. Secondly, I think there's also a certain degree of technological anxiety. I feel that this auto show, like I told my colleague, doesn't have the same technological vibe as before. Instead, it's actually better to have 100 flowers bloom, whether it's in electrification or. But when it comes to intelligence, things are still relatively monotonous. And then I don't know what you think, but let me first share my impressions. Thirdly, I feel there's quite a bit of anxiety because everyone knows the data from January to March was very poor. And although the numbers in April have picked up a bit, but it's still not that ideal, especially the domestic data, which isn't that good either, right? But there are still some highlights. At the time, I told him that we might see some things, whether it's BYD's flash charging technology or Zhijia technology, for example. Huawei also has some different highlights on their side. Then I said, overall, anxiety might be the first word, and the second word might be something like tribute because it just so happened to coincide with Mercedes-Benz's 140th anniversary, such a historic moment. So overall, that's the impression I gave him. I don't know about you. What do you think of the overall impression of this auto show?
So today, since we've chosen this particular time, it's a perfect opportunity to talk about it. The Beijing Auto Show, the Beijing Auto Show should be described as unprecedentedly prosperous. We can truly call it an auto show because the first car in the world, recognized globally, was made by Mercedes-Benz in January 1886. So, from the invention of the automobile to 2026, it will be exactly the 140th anniversary.
It seems like this time they even brought that three-wheeler onto the exhibition stage.
That was the patent obtained by Mercedes-Benz in January 1886. So the birth of the automobile should be marked as the 140th anniversary. So this year's Beijing Auto Show can also be considered the most unprecedentedly large auto show in this 140th anniversary. My first impression was that April 24th was the first day of the auto show, the first media day. So that evening, when everyone was discussing their impressions of the first day of the auto show, I said something. In the past, in my mind, international auto shows now look more like Chinese auto shows. A very typical example is last September's Munich Auto Show. Mr. Ding Lei probably went as well. The two of us were both there, and inside that exhibition hall, I felt that less than half of the cars were German brands, while more than half were Chinese cars. And then GM and Ford,
And then
Toyota, Honda, Nissan, and Hyundai, these 6 major brands were all absent. So only the Beijing Auto Show now feels more like the international auto show we have in our minds. So that day, I shared a feeling. The international auto show I used to imagine has now evolved into a Chinese auto show, and only the Beijing Auto Show can truly. What does it mean to experience a true international auto show? All the major brands are present.
And looking back, I suddenly thought of the Munich Auto Show. At that event, the booths with the most traffic were actually those of Chinese brands. I remember at the time it was the Lining booth and also the Aito booth, if I recall correctly. Both were packed with people. So at Munich, the point you just mentioned was definitely true. And this time it seems they used two halls with a total area of about 380,000 square meters. Back then, the two of us walked straight across the hall, right? How many minutes did it take to walk across?
About 1.3 to 1.5 kilometers.
Yeah, we walked that far. Such a huge place.
So on the 24th, That day, I think I ran about 4 to 5 kilometers inside the hall.
Yeah, I actually did even more, almost 15 kilometers. So, as you just said, this scale really is, in the truest sense, an international event. Auto show. In the past, it was always said to be one of the world's top 10 international auto shows. But now it seems that only Shanghai or Beijing in China.
Can truly be called an international auto show. Because, as I've heard, some companies now either participate in the Beijing or Shanghai Auto Show or only attend their own country's auto show. For the automotive industry, like in Germany, Japan, the US, China, Korea, and so on. Of course, they will support their own domestic brands as key industries. Naturally, you have to attend your own country's auto show, like the Tokyo Auto Show.
I went to Tokyo.
I didn't go. You didn't go, right?
It really does seem just like you said. Maybe there are more domestic car brands there.
And now, Chinese cars are participating in auto shows all over the world.
So this is actually also a topic of national pride. With the rise of China's automobile industry, now the world looks to China for cars.
Right?
When it comes to China, people look at Beijing or Shanghai, those few cities. The big auto shows, yes. So that's your first impression. What about your other impression?
The second thing, as Mr. Dingley just mentioned, is that it feels like the technology is no longer so diverse. It's the car models that are flourishing now.
Yes.
That's also my second impression.
There are more and more car models.
There's innovation in electrification and innovation in intelligence. Looking at this year's Beijing Auto Show, why is it no longer so diverse? I think after more than a decade of innovation, now whether it's electrification technology or intelligent technology, we're starting to see convergence in the technology.
Both electrification and intelligence are converging.
They're all converging. In the end, electrification is converging toward passenger car electrification. As for the technology, it's converging toward hybrid, plug-in hybrid, range extender, and energy storage. So for electrification, range extenders and energy storage lean toward electric, while hybrids and plug-in hybrids lean toward fuel. This means electrification has already converged. Large battery packs mean long range. The range has also converged to between 600 and 900 kilometers on a full charge, 800 kilometers. In this way, these technical parameters, as well as the parameters for electrification, are also converging. Super fast charging and flash charging, like 5 minutes, 9 minutes, are basically converging as well. Battery chemistries like lithium iron phosphate and ternary lithium are also tending to converge. These two are the main ones, though of course there are some discussions about other types of batteries. Some are discussing semi-solid or so-called liquid solid or what is called condensed state batteries. Of course, the concept of fully solid state batteries isn't as prominent this year as it was last year. So it seems that fully solid state batteries are still some distance away from mass production. So from the perspective of batteries, things are actually starting to converge. So it feels to me that electrification technology has already begun to converge. As for intelligent technology, it's about moving from level 2 to level 3. This trend is already becoming apparent. The second point is sensor fusion, integrated sensors, sensor fusion. This trend is also becoming clear. So although autonomous driving hasn't been fully realized yet, if you look at the overall exhibition booths and the technology releases, the technical direction is converging.
Actually, this also represents a certain achievement of industry clustering or a kind of consensus within the industry. And then
you just mentioned the third feeling, talking about anxiety. The anxiety is that the prosperity and sales of cars shown at this year's auto show, Jane, don't match up. The prosperity you see at the auto show. There is a stark contrast between the sales figures and those in the first quarter of this year.
Actually, the volume of buzz generated by auto shows, or perhaps the boom in auto shows, is itself a result of sales anxiety.
If technological advancements and the proliferation of new car models lead to increased sales, then there's no need for anxiety.
A positive cycle.
In a positive cycle, there is no anxiety. What car companies fear is not investing money, but that the cost invested in R&D won't pay off. If they can't get a response in the market,
then that's because there's a time lag. Because according to the traditional pace of car manufacturing, it might take 3 or 4 years of investment. And only after 3 or 4 years do you see the results and revenue. Now, car manufacturing is getting faster and faster, but it still takes at least half a year or a year in advance. Invest for a year or two, then reap the reward.
So the total volume of sales in a single quarter are simply not enough to sustain the long-term success and growth of these new models.
That's right. So this prosperity is just an illusion.
So this prosperity has turned into anxiety.
Anxiety, yes, please explain. That's it. What I said at the time and what my colleague said was about that illusion of prosperity. So actually, this is your third impression, right? The first point is that in the true sense, if you want to see an international auto show, you can only look at China. The second point,
if you want to see all the passenger car brands in the world, as things stand now,
you can only
go to the auto show in China to see them.
So this time, the proportion of foreigners at the China Auto Show is especially high. They actually have statistics showing that nearly 40% of the attendees are foreigners, and that's because
the 24th and 25th are media days, and the 26th is a professional day. At this time, the number of people inside the exhibition hall, I think my impression is about the same as yours. About 40% are professionals from foreign companies.
You just mentioned BMW. Actually, another reason why so many foreigners from BMW came is because they made some management changes this year and last year, because they are overseeing things directly. The person in charge of China's marketing is now directly from the foreign headquarters. They're managing it themselves. And then their global chairman, Zipse, is also set to, his term is ending this year. Actually, that's another topic altogether. Maybe some of the topics on the entire joint venture platform at the booth, because in the past, sales weren't quite up to expectation. Then there was a large-scale change in the management team. I'm not sure if, besides the first three, there are any others, because everyone
must transform.
Right?
So now, with the new shift toward electrification, we definitely have to look at China, because including Tesla's electrification, it actually got its start here. But I think at this year's auto show, you can basically see the term electrification everywhere. The end of electrification might mean rapid innovation in electrification, but this rapid innovation seems to have come to a halt.
It will now enter a relatively stable phase. So
that is to say, if we look at electrification now, it's probably more about looking at the BYD booth. Of course, Tesla doesn't participate in the auto show either. But even if they did participate in the auto show, I think Tesla's electrification has already... There's nothing left that's worth seeing. Of course, as for intelligence, at present, the technological direction is still being led by Tesla. Whether we're talking about end-to-end solutions, visual language, or large models being integrated into cars, this is still being led by Tesla. But because Tesla doesn't participate in the auto show, then at the auto show, perhaps, when it comes to intelligence. Now, in this area, one is the Huawei camp, specifically the release of ADS 5.0. The second is the participation of Horizon Robotics with the release of the Horizon Starry Sky 6P. These two are representative of the electrification technology sector. There's a trend of convergence.
The core of BYD is that charging conversion technology. So just now you mentioned 3 impressions. Do you think there are any other impressions?
The fourth impression should be this. That is, there's another wave of new forces entering the Chinese market, namely joint ventures.
For example, if we look back at previous auto shows, there was one year when the Central Medical Institute became part of the auto show. A new variable emerged, which is the new forces among the new forces themselves. This year, there is also such a variable. For example, Dreamy, right? Dreamy has also entered the scene. So is this a new thing at the auto show? Or what do you think about Dreamy's situation? Would you consider it one of your impressions of the auto show?
Dreamy is very mysterious. This company is quite enigmatic. But in the automotive field, it probably hasn't reached a level of significant attention yet. That's this year. I think if you ask teacher Dingley whether there is a fifth sense, then this year the fifth sense is that your launch must be for a mass-produced product. Otherwise, there won't be any attention to chase after.
Are you talking about Dreamy here as well?
So I won't talk about Dreamy because they haven't mass-produced anything yet. If they can attract attention, it will have to wait until their car is out.
Right, so for now, they're still unclear. As a member of the automotive industry,
if they're able to participate in the auto show, according to the rules of the show, whether their booth is defined as a complete vehicle manufacturer depends on which hall they're in. In theory, without a car manufacturing qualification, it's impossible for them to be allowed into the complete vehicle section. Regarding the exhibition hall, I'm not too sure, so to sum up, first, the car definitely hasn't been mass-produced yet, and second, it's also uncertain whether they've obtained, or in what way they've obtained, the qualification to manufacture cars. Basically, their popularity can't sustain it.
Right, let's not talk about that for now. So let's get back to the topic.
So there are 4 highlights, 4 features.
Right, so let's go through them one by one and talk about these 4 highlights. The first one is probably the topic of sales, the market and sales figures. Actually, from January to March, the sales have already been pretty dismal, really quite dismal. And the first reason might be that every year, the first quarter is always the off-season, right? But indeed, there are also some, but compared to the previous period, it's also declining. Yes, the month-on-month numbers are also dropping. And in addition, actually, every year, subsidies also get reduced around that time. But this year, it really is quite bad, especially domestically. Looking at both the domestic and international markets as a whole, could you analyze this situation?
If it weren't for the international market holding things up, I think the first quarter would have been even worse. Yes, of course, in the first quarter, the new energy vehicle market in China will decline. This is something we could predict and expect because of policy changes. Wasn't the subsidy for new energy vehicle purchase tax cut in half? Now they have to collect half of the purchase tax. So in the fourth quarter of last year, the market saw some early investment in sales volume. So in the first quarter, new energy vehicles were affected by policies, one of which was the issue of the purchase tax being halved. The second is the trade-in program. The new trade-in subsidy barely affects cars over 200,000 yuan. However, for those between 100,000 and 150,000 yuan, a major segment for passenger car sales, the impact is significant. So for cars under 150,000 yuan, they are actually negatively affected by both policies. Therefore, the first quarter was impacted. The biggest impact was definitely there, so I don't need to elaborate further. The third and fourth quarters, as we say, are traditionally the peak seasons for car sales. And then with this policy being announced in advance, right, this leads to a phenomenon of demand being pulled forward, especially for new cars in the 100,000 to 150,000 yuan price range. The demand pull forward effect is most severe for new energy vehicles. This also applies to new energy vehicles priced above 200,000 yuan. With the policy change that increases the purchase tax by about 5% for cars, this will also lead to demand being pulled forward. So we already knew that January sales would be quite poor, but I think they turned out better than expected. One reason is that the Persian Gulf War between the United States and Iran has led to a rise in oil prices. In the future, new energy vehicles will become stronger in overseas markets. But this aspect has actually held things back a bit.
Let's talk about each part separately. As for the domestic market, it's actually already a relatively stable market, but at the same time, it's also slightly shrinking in scale. Then, due to policy adjustments, the domestic market has seen peaks in consumption and troughs as well, mainly because of these stimulus policies. At this stage of development, or for the overall market as a whole, these large-scale stimulus policies actually no longer have a significant impact on total sales. So are these stimulus policies themselves still necessary? Do we still need such seasonal or cyclical adjustments, or are there better ways to make these adjustments? And another question is, does the domestic market still have better forms of stimulus, or will there be more of them in the future?
This area. Actually, this is also a topic that's widely discussed within the industry. That is the penetration rate of new energy vehicles.
Hmm.
The penetration rate in the Chinese market is already the highest in the world, reaching 60%. So the question here is whether it's necessary to push it to 70% or 80%. I think when it comes to stimulus or subsidies for new energy vehicles, personally, I think it should be cancelled. There's no need for further stimulus.
So even with stimulus, it can't reach 80%.
Because in the end, if you subsidize through taxes, it will definitely come from tax revenue. Subsidies. In other words, automobiles have already become China's largest subsidized industry. In the past, we talked about 10 key industries. One is real estate, the other is automobiles. Now, we don't even dare touch real estate anymore, right? It's about adjusting the industrial structure. After that, among the major industries above the top 10, only automobiles are left. If such a huge industry is still stimulated by tax incentives, tax exemptions, or reductions, then the automobile industry's contribution to China's economy,
its driving force, its driving effect,
wouldn't that just make it big but not strong?
right?
So if you want to be strong, why do you need tax reductions and exemptions?
And it's already reached this critical point. It's already 60 to 40, right? It's 60-40 now, making it the ultimate form.
I think once it surpasses 50%, there shouldn't be any more policy-driven stimulus. Just let the market decide.
Right. And the pace of this development has really been incredibly fast. I remember at the Chongqing Forum, it must have been 3 or 4 years ago, everyone was still discussing whether it was possible to reach 50%, and now it's already surpassed 60%.
Yes. The original goal set for 2035 has already been achieved ahead of schedule.
Right?
Achieved ahead of schedule. Last year, we talked about how the production rate of new energy vehicles had already reached the target 10 years ahead of schedule. Yes. So at this point, whether we use gasoline or electricity, I think we should just let things take their natural course. So looking at this year, with the changes in the purchase tax, this will lead to changes in the product structure of new energy vehicles, specifically electric vehicles. The biggest phenomenon is that hybrid vehicles, especially plug-in hybrids, are still dominant, which is why I just mentioned the electrification of vehicles, especially the electrification of passenger cars. I think this technological innovation has already converged, meaning it has converged into 4 types of vehicles: fuel-oriented hybrids, plug-in hybrids, electricity-oriented range extenders, and pure electric vehicles. These 4 types of vehicles. So why did hybrids suddenly surge this year? It's because the subsidies for plug-in new energy vehicles have already been halved. By next year, there will be none left, meaning they will also have to pay the same approximately 10% purchase tax. So as the purchase tax incentives decrease in the Chinese market, which will win out, hybrids or plug-in hybrids? I think hybrids will win over plug-in hybrids.
So in the end, there will be a few forms, the final form.
Yes, because plug-in hybrids with large battery packs don't make much sense. So as so-called large battery packs and charging technology improve, charging becomes faster and faster. Secondly, the number of charging stations is increasing more and more. At this point, the proportion of range extenders with large battery packs has already declined. So by 2023 and 2024, what about the ratio of range extenders to pure electric vehicles for some brands? Range extenders can account for 90%. In the past, large six-seaters were all range extenders, right? As for pure electric versions, in 2023 and 2020, they just couldn't sell. But by 2025, with the widespread adoption of superfast charging, the ratio of range extenders to pure electric vehicles will approach 50%, basically half and half. Then, with the emergence of flash charging, that is megawatt-level superfast charging, I think this ratio will change even further. So, for range extenders, from those with 40 kilowatt hours or 50 kilowatt hours battery packs, if you look at the new range extenders now, aren't they all above 60 kilowatt hours? There are even range extenders now with 80 kilowatt hour battery packs, these ultra large battery packs. So, with the improvement of charging technology, I think the share of range extenders will decrease while pure electric will increase. Then, plug-in hybrids will also start using large battery packs. As for the significance, once the battery pack in plug-in hybrids reaches 30 kilowatt hours, that should be the standard, right? At this point, however, there is a challenge in promoting plug-in hybrids in China. Do plug-in hybrid cars really go to public charging stations to charge? Not really. Even if the battery supports fast charging for just a few kilowatt hours, I'd have to charge every day. Users might find it inconvenient to have to charge once a day, so the most suitable users for plug-in hybrids may be limited. The issue is that this problem of fake charging exists throughout all of Asia. Our residential and lifestyle patterns are highly clustered. In fact, the situation is even more serious in Japan and South Korea than in China because we prefer to live in big cities. Rural areas are undergoing urbanization. In the future, people will be even more concentrated in towns and cities.
Clustered housing.
It's very difficult for everyone to have the conditions needed for charging installations.
Charging installations, too, are impacted by property management and other factors.
Older communities are even less supportive. Their transformers simply can't support too many charging installations. It's not even possible to install those 7,000-watt charging units for all the parking spaces to be fully equipped. So from this perspective, plug-in hybrids actually don't have their best user base in Asia. So plug-in hybrids that lean towards gasoline, that is hybrids and plug-in hybrids. I think that in the Chinese market, as new energy vehicles develop, with the reduction of subsidies, hybrids should become more prominent. Instead, plug-in hybrids are actually very suitable
for Europe. So in the end, there are also two forms for the entire new energy vehicle sector, right? Just as you summarized earlier.
Hybrids and plug-in hybrids that lean towards gasoline are more suitable for China. So by next year, when it comes to hybrids and plug-in hybrids, I think the proportion in the Chinese market will tend to be higher for hybrids.
And then the other form is
range extenders and pure electric storage. As the charging speed of charging stations moves towards megawatt level speeds, and as the layout of charging stations develops, it should be heading in this direction. Pure electric storage, of course, one leans towards gasoline and the other leans towards electricity. So the Yangtze River Delta and the Pearl River Delta definitely lean towards electric vehicles. In terms of seasons, South China and East China definitely favor pure electric. And actually, Central and South China can also go this way. Southwest China can also go pure electric. In Beijing and the northern regions, that's where the dividing line starts to appear. I think their electricity and gasoline might be about half and half.
That's the line we talked about last time, the one marked with a red line. Yes, one in the north and one in the south.
Then, in the vast northwest and northeast, I think you still need to have it.
There are geographical boundaries and differences. And just now, you also mentioned that in the future, new energy might only have two forms, and these two forms will emerge. Around when do you think that will happen? Maybe next year?
Because after January 2027, the purchase tax for new energy vehicles will be reinstated. It will be collected at a rate of 10%. This could become a dividing line in terms of timing. Yes, the biggest change might be the shift from plug-in hybrids to hybrids, especially for those more suitable for gasoline vehicles. And for those who prefer gasoline cars, but pure gasoline cars might really not survive. They just can't make it. For pure gasoline cars, if the fuel consumption per 100 kilometers, according to CLTC standards, can be kept below 7 liters, that's already quite an achievement. Getting it down to 6 liters is already very difficult. As for the actual fuel consumption experienced by users, 8 to 12 liters, that's for pure gasoline cars. Now, when it comes to hybrids, especially those from the two major Japanese brands and mainly Toyota, they've basically managed to achieve 4 to 5 liters. So we can say that Toyota's hybrids have managed to bring the fuel consumption per 100 kilometers, actual user fuel consumption, down to 4 to 5 liters. Domestic hybrid vehicles that lean more toward electric have already brought it down to around 3 liters. Unfortunately, when it comes to hybrids, in terms of power, at least in terms of product technical specifications, we've already surpassed the two Japanese brands. In the past, when we talked about new energy vehicles, it was considered the domain of Chinese brands. Hybrid vehicles, on the other hand, were seen as the territory of Japanese brands like Toyota and Honda. But now, fortunately, I think that as the subsidies for new energy vehicles in China have been phased out, these domestic independent brands, that is, Chinese brands, have finally caught up in the field of hybrid technology, this particular area.
Yes, and looking at it now, regarding tech specs,
we've already surpassed the Japanese brands.
Its
market performance will depend on its reliability. If they can keep the failure rate under control during users' actual use and maintain reliability, I think our hybrids, just like our new energy vehicles, can also reach a new level.
Let's talk a bit more about this. When it comes to sales in the international market, it seems that the future of Chinese automobiles, the hope for growth in the coming years, also lies in the international market. Some people may have doubts now, saying that the growth is so rapid that it's a business with many twists and turns, and a lot of the data might, in the past, it accounted for 20% or 30%, but this year it's almost reached 40 or even more. Is there perhaps some exaggeration in this proportion? And another thing is, how can we avoid the issues that arise during the trial period or testing phase when entering the international market? I'm not sure what your perspective is on this.
The risks in the international market are definitely greater than those in the domestic market. One change is that from exporting complete vehicles, we may gradually move towards producing overseas. This is the general trend, and it's also how China's joint venture path came about, right? Because last year, China's automobile exports exceeded 8 million units, which is already quite astonishing, indeed. Of course, this demonstrates the competitiveness of China's automotive industry chain abroad. In terms of competitiveness, producing in China may be the lowest cost and best cost-controlled way to manufacture complete vehicles. The risks of exporting are definitely higher than those of the domestic market. That is, the risks in the international market are certainly greater than in the domestic market. There are more uncertainties, and the impact of policies definitely exists. It's a gradual process. The shift from exporting complete vehicles to localized production overseas is happening. As for the Chinese market, joint ventures entering China, these are the major international brands coming into China. It's not about exporting complete vehicles, right? Back then, we used industrial policies. I believe that the governments of all automotive markets outside of China will also introduce similar measures. Industrial policies won't allow excessive exports of complete vehicles.
Right, how multinationals entered China, taxes and so on.
Right.
Chinese companies will also need to take a similar path in reverse.
It could happen at any time. With high taxes of over 40%, it definitely forces us to pursue localized production. This path.
Yes.
So if we produce abroad, the risks will only increase further. Well, now the risks have already become apparent, such as labor risks and compliance. The challenge of compliance is only going to get harder. In the Chinese market, the main competitive advantage of Chinese brands is efficiency. But if we move into international markets, the first thing we may have to do is let go of efficiency. This kind of priority thinking needs to shift. Compliance comes first. So, for example, when it comes to their labor systems, such as overtime policies, in our minds, we tend to think that working overtime is perfectly natural, but if you try it, you'll find that they may have a very different attitude toward overtime. They have their own management practices for this. So when it comes to compliance requirements, things that we take for granted and see as perfectly normal are actually considered violations over there. If you don't rest on Saturdays and Sundays, even if you say it's voluntary, it still isn't allowed. You must take a break. So the focus may need to shift from maximizing efficiency to prioritizing compliance, even if that means limited efficiency. This is the first hurdle that Chinese automotive brands encounter when going abroad. The second point is that they will employ some new non-tariff measures, barriers. And then there's another aspect. They will also use market-based technologies. So can we transfer our core technologies? All of these are tests we have to go through.
So just now we talked about the entire market or the issue of total sales.
There's something else that's very important too. Can after-sales maintenance keep up? For cars, if after-sales service can't keep up, your brand and quality won't hold up either. No car can survive on its own. There absolutely must be a large after-sales system. So as our whole vehicle exports have increased over the past few years, In fact, there have already been some discordant voices regarding maintenance in overseas markets. Voices like these. There have even been cases where it has affected the brand.
Right, just like people in the industry often say, cars are a rather special product. The real service only begins the moment the car is sold, and that's when all kinds of after-sales issues start to arise. So actually, looking at this auto show overall in terms of sales, there are both positive aspects for Chinese car companies.
That is, even if, plus the sales in China's overseas markets and the policy changes for new energy vehicles last year, which led to early investments. This provided some support for first quarter sales. But first quarter sales will still have an impact on this kind of large-scale new energy vehicles and new models. Does such prosperity still create anxiety?
Overall, it's just the anxiety in this area anyway. And then,
as I just mentioned, since the technology has already started to converge, I think the pace of launching new cars should slow down going forward.
right,
From starting last year, there have been some policy requirements. Last year, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology already strengthened the verification of the reliability of new models. That is, you must accumulate enough user mileage, meaning real road usage. The test must cover a certain number of road test mileages. Should we use this to shorten the development cycle of new car models? We hope to control the development cycle of a new car model to at least 18 months.
that is now clearly
Initially, we used a 5-year cycle for each model, then it became 36 months for 3 years, then 24 months for 2 years, and now we use some simulations. Technology is accelerated through laboratory experiments and factory technologies. Just take a look. Now, the laboratory capabilities of various car companies are all particularly strong. Most of these leading companies have their own test tracks. By accelerating and strengthening experiments through laboratories and test tracks, we can finally complete the development of a car. The development cycle has been shortened to 18 months, but now the pace of launching new cars is already less than 18 months.
yes, for many, it's actually within a year.
Last year, the MIIT tightened checks on the reliability of new models,
I think this is very important because, after all, safety is paramount.
strengthening real vehicle road testing. Road testing with actual vehicles is very difficult to accelerate. But real vehicle road testing is the true assessment. For this car, the real vehicle road test of the body matches how users actually use it. The highest degree of authenticity comes from this, whereas accelerating tests on proving grounds weakens the realism of actual use. That's the situation we're talking about. Coordination or relevance will decrease, and then the relevance of bench tests will definitely decrease even further. It will weaken step by step.